All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Rick Cast Reviews. Sorry, it's been a while, but we are back, and we are back with a bang, I guess you could say, as we start the summer movie season with, of course, a franchise that most of us have a soft spot for, particularly in the last couple films. I'm talking, of course, about the Mission Impossible franchise, and this is the final installment. Maybe it's most likely going to be the final installment because I don't think it's going to do the numbers they want it to do, but it is Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. And I guess the plot is so obtuse that even when you look on IMDb, it says our lives are the sums of our choices. Tom Cruise is Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. So yeah, we know, we've watched 9 other films or 8 other films or 7 other films of this, and this is the follow-up to the 2023 film, The Dead Reckoning, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. And so this is the second half. They tried to rename it to make it seem like it's not, but it's so locked into um the Dead Reckoning storyline that it essentially is a two-parter. They just tried to get away with it because the first one was supposed to be Dead Reckoning Part 1, Dead Reckoning Part 2, but the response to that was so negative in Dead Reckoning's run that they just got rid of the Part 1 part, and then they said it's Final Reckoning, but it's really not. Anyway, I will shut up, get the moving pictures for you as I start this review. So Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is the 8th installment in this long running since 96 action franchise. And the promise is this is the grand finale, right? You hear him in the trailer saying, I need you to trust me one more time. And it is burdened by the films before, as any final, whether it's a final episode of a TV show or any finale, the expectations of what it should be versus what comes out are always mixed. People have high hopes that it's going to stick the landing, and most of the time, barring a miracle, final chapters don't stick the landing. Now, people say, oh, there could be another one, but this movie costs reportedly between $300 and $400 million. That was just the budget, and then another $100 million on marketing, which means this thing's got to clear somewhere between $800 million to $1 billion in the box office run, plus BOV and all these other kinds of stuff. So I'm gonna go on this review saying that this is the final installment, and they treat it as a final installment. So this is the follow-up, like I said, to Dead Reckoning, and both this is directed by Christopher McQuarrie, and it's the final battle or the conclusion of the battle against the rogue AI, the Entity, and it promises two things that it tries to deliver on: A, the closure of the entire Mission Impossible saga. You could say at this point, eight films is a saga, especially post Ghost Protocol, how they all kind of started to fit into each other. Now, this film tries to retcon some of that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the entire idea is that A, it's going to close all that, and B, it's going to give a satisfying ending to Tom Cruise or Ethan Hunt versus the Rogue AI. And Rogue AI is a nice idea in concept. I, for one, am not big on using technology as a villain or as a substantive point in a film because it dates it very quickly. Because technology evolves so quickly. Just look at cell phones in early 2000 films versus now. They date films, and that's a problem with the Dead Reckoning, the Reckoning saga, if you want to call it that. But this film has those two goals it's supposed to do: close up the Mission Impossible saga and then give the ending. And unfortunately, because these two things are so weighty, right, it's so heavy for both, the burden on both of these, that Christopher McQuarrie, who wrote it with one of his writing partners, and then he wrote the screenplay, does his best. He really does, but it's just too much to execute and stick the landing. Now, of course, I always go 3 positive, 3 negative, and then I'll give you my final outcome. The first thing is this film delivers on what it promises. It doesn't really promise Shakespeare. It doesn't promise a sonnet or any thespian experience. You're going to see Tom Cruise in his 60s do crazy stuff. It's actually funny if you rewatch all the Mission Impossibles, like I did on the way up to this. They even call this out in the second film where the villain talks about the entire process that Ethan Hunt goes through. And they take that formula and they apply it. And once they figured it out in Ghost Protocol onward, really culminating in Fallout, they really nailed the spectacular set pieces. And this film is an absolute masterclass in the set pieces. The two main ones, the submarine and then the planes. You see them both. I won't talk about them much further, but they are absolutely um they serve their purpose. The term nail biting is a cliche, but in the submarine, it's an extended sequence where you're really on the edge of your seat. You're very nervous the way it's done. And of course, the airplane scene, the true climax of the film. I actually my hands got sweaty and I kind of glanced away for a moment. That's how intense. So if you're going to go see this film for that, it really they put the work in and it is a masterclass in that. The set pieces are amazing and you have to give Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie credit for committing to that and really delivering on that promise. So they absolutely do it. I don't want to go into spoilers yet. I'll go into spoilers in a little bit. The second one is the I'm going to say the connections that they actually were able to do. Some people don't like retconning. I don't mind it, and I'm going to actually, you know what? I'm going to start spoiling this movie because spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. So the retconning of Mission Impossible 1 and Mission Impossible 3 in particular, it's kind of funny. They just leave Mission Impossible 2 alone. Mission Impossible 1 and Mission Impossible 3, I think, add a little bit more to a rich storyline. It kind of adds to the ethos and the world building. Of course, that helps weigh it down a little bit on the back end. But I don't mind. I think I like it. Some people call it fan service. I don't mind it. I think it's fine. I liked the weaving of the entire narrative to this endpoint. I'm a fan of it. And then finally, you get the closure that you're hoping for, and or they're at least present it. It's a positive there. They if this film franchise stops tomorrow, and I think it will after this weekend, it's at least a nice closing of the door. It works in that regard. It closes the door, and people can watch if you wanted to blow out a weekend in the winter or something like that. If you got snowed in or rainy, summer day, you could blow through all 8 films, which would take you more than a day, but you could blow through all 8 films and it has a through line, it has a closure, which is nice because a lot of franchises try to open end it. Now, it may be wrong going forward, but at least right now, I like the fact that they at least closed it. They kind of put the pin in it. That's really all I can say about the positives, which isn't great because we're going to move into the negatives. The plot is too stuffed. Like I said, they tried to balance the end of the saga with the AI stuff. They don't work together. If you wanted to make a final Mission Impossible film, the villain needs to be lighter and it needs to be quicker. One thing I can tell you is I noticed right off the bat when you watch Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, and Fallout, they're not light films by any means, but they're quick paced. They don't waste time, and and the plot is at least serviceable to get there. This one is an expedition dump, literally from the jump. The first frames of the film are exposition dumps, and it's one dump at ironically enough, there's an expedition dump in the first scene, and then about 10 minutes later there's a second expedition dump using uh the same mode. The AI does the expedition dumps, and I'm thinking to myself, you could have cut the first expedition dump and just shoved the important stuff into this one. You didn't need 2 of them. And so that was a problem there, is that the AI plot is so heavy, and it's not really clear cut. How is this working? Where's it going? We need to get this. We have to get this thing in order to do that. It needed to be lighter. If you wanted to be a final Mission Impossible film, then we want to enjoy the guys and the characters one more time. We want to enjoy one more run, and we don't want it to be super light, but we don't want to have to be like, all right, is the AI doing this? What's going on here? Is my phone on? Like, what is it taking over my phone? How's this working? And so that's a problem. Either give us an AI storyline where you can flesh that out, or give us the Mission Impossible closure film fleshed out. Too weighed down, and that's a really nasty. It's a really negative thing, because you just don't enjoy it. There's so much exposition and so much setup that when you get to the submarine and then you get to the plane, you're like, these are awesome, but why did I have to wait X amount of time to get here? We could have gotten here much quicker. I agree with Dave Cullen. You could have cut. He says 30 minutes. I'm thinking you could have gotten 45 minutes with a really good editor. You could have cut this film down to about 220, which is around the same time as like Rogue Nation and Fallout. You can get that into the 220 phase. I'm going to actually say one thing here, that you could. There's a universe where you cut about 45 minutes out of Dead Reckoning, the first part of this chapter. I mean, I love the Rome car chase scene, but you could have gotten rid of that. You could have dumped that, and then you could have dumped a couple other things, and you could have taken the most important parts of this film and shoved the two together. And I think you would have had a really great Mission Impossible film, just focused on the AI. And then you could do one, like the eighth film could have been a final wrap up sort of way. The Reckoning saga did not require two films, and I think that was a mistake that Cruise and McQuarrie made coming off the success of Fallout. And this the second point is, I've kind of talked about it already. This movie does not sprint off the line. You're used to seeing that action set piece where it's not really a part of the film. They're robbing something, they're taking something, they're stealing something, and then they hit the music, and then you get the Mission Impossible theme. I kind of was waiting. I'm like, all right, is this when they're gonna start it? Is this when they're gonna I'm waiting for the action, the set piece title frame, because we're so used to it. We're so used to the set piece, and then Tom Cruise says something like witty one liner. He's like, strike the fuse or something like that, and then he'll and so we didn't get that. We didn't get it. We didn't get it. And we're kind of the whole point of the film, the way you're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for it to go. So that the lack of action really, and it's not going to help if you watch Dead Reckoning and the Final Reckoning back to back, because it's such a heavy exposition dump at the beginning of Dead Reckoning. If you're watching them back to back, you're going to go, I already know this. It's not filmed to be watched in a saga. So that's the case. And then finally, the weak villain and overblown stakes. Now, the entity, the AI threat, it's hard to battle something like you didn't battle Skynet in the Terminator. You battled the Terminator, who is a representative of Skynet. And that's some of the problems that this film has, is that the entity is too abstract. It's too in the ether. It's like, oh, it's everywhere. It's all right. When it's everywhere, it's nowhere kind of deal. And so that doesn't work. And the antagonist, who I'm actually a fan of, I'm a huge fan of this actor. Iris Morales is his name, I believe. Isa Morales. He was really good in Jericho. If you're a Jericho fan, he was excellent as the general in Jericho and a couple other films and stuff like that. I really like him as an actor, but the script does him no favors. The script does him no favors, and he comes off as the weakest, probably the weakest villain since Mission Impossible 2, ironically enough. And so it just doesn't, it's not befitting for the final one for Ethan Hunt to go up against, that both of these antagonists just don't strike the fear that you think, because there's no point where you think, oh well, if Tom Cruise gets his hands on this bad guy, he's just gonna beat the crap out of him. He's gonna beat him, and that's gonna be it. Whereas in other hands, like with Henry Cavill and others, you're like, oh, well, this is actually kind of there's an actual threat there. So you have that. And then, spoiler alert, they're trying the big MacGuffin of the film is that we have to get to the entity because the entity is taking over the 8 global nuclear superpowers, and the entity is going to use it to launch a nuclear winter, to which they are going to hide in some super bunker in South Africa. And then after the fallout, they're going to rebuild the world in the AI image. So you have the anti-god, Mission Impossible 3 shout out uh from the point of view of the entity versus Tom Cruise's messianic figure. And he is messianic in this sense, and I don't use that lightly. Constantly people keep saying, you're the only one I trust, Ethan. You're the only one that can do this. You're the only one that can control the AI. And I'm thinking to myself, Ethan has done some pretty crazy things in these 8 films, but I don't know if there's anything he's done in these 8 films for me to be like, yeah, you can totally control the AI. So no, I didn't like any of that. A couple of extra bonus negatives, not really great. Um, I I don't like the new cast, right? Spoiler alert, they knock off Ving Rhames 10 minutes into the film. He dies. He's gone. And then they replace him with generic diversity hire number 5, who has no charisma. He may be a fine actor, but we don't know him, and now he's thrust into this role. Haley Atwell, I love you. I think Agent Carter is an amazing character. I've liked you in some other stuff. Well, I hate to say this, you just don't hang as well as Rebecca Ferguson did. These films really start going downhill when she dies in Dead Reckoning. And I think it's pretty sad that everything that Haley Atwell's character does in this film, Rebecca Ferguson could have done. And I think it was weird to get rid of her and then drop in these new characters, maybe to set up a next trilogy, which I don't think there's going to be. But she's great at what she does, and her character's fine. But I actually kept thinking to myself, Rebecca Ferguson probably could have done this just as much as Haley Atwell, and there's a longer history there. That's the big thing. If you're going to make this a final chapter, don't swap out the people we know for new people at the last second. They always do these same thing happened in House season 8. They kind of just brought in a bunch of new people towards the end, but that's a different story. It kind of makes the same thing. The new cast, they're fine actors. This is nothing against any of them, but they're done a disservice by being dropped in in the last movie. And for all these connections that the script's trying to make to previous films, it could have been easier if they kept some of the previous cast members. I was kind of hoping for like a Jeremy Renner cameo or some other cameos here, but that didn't happen either. So overall, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, looking at my notes, is a good. There are parts of it that are just absolutely breathtaking. The submarine set piece, the plane set piece, just breathtaking. But it's really weighed down by a script that can't balance the final Mission Impossible script with a really bad villain. It's good on some parts, but not good on some others. The slow start, the fact that the villain and the threat are just so nebulous. There's nothing tangible about them. It doesn't stick the landing, and that's really what I have to say there. So overall, do I give it a pass or a fail? I'm going to give it a weak pass. Right? Like it passes. If you go and you're a fan of the Mission Impossible series, you might get a lot out of it. If you're a big fan of Tom Cruise and what he does and you want to support what he does, you might get a lot out of it. If you're just kind of going because you like the other ones, you're not really invested in the films, but you like seeing Tom Cruise do a bunch of crazy stuff, you might get bored because he doesn't do crazy stuff for like an hour, and you're gonna find yourself being like, what are we doing? And so it's a pass, but it's a very, very weak pass. And so I don't want to say that. I wanted this film to be excellent. I wanted this to be a final chapter that was both thrilling and satisfying and really fitting for what Tom Cruise has done for cinema and for this franchise. overall, but it's not the case. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with me here on Rickcast Reviews. Like, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell for future reviews. I'll talk to y'all later, and don't skip out.